All right, y'all, I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. PG, join us on video when you can. Thank you, welcome. My name is Alex Goodwin and I'm a senior organizer at Action Center on Race and the Economy. Today's panel is titled The Next Fight, Combating the Ever-Rising Surveillance State. And we'll be talking about the rise of surveillance technology and corporate power in the last decade and what that means as we face a new set of challenges and concerns in this current movement moment. Our work at ACRE focuses on the ways that Wall Street is extracted from our communities. So my work in particular looks at the relationship between Wall Street and policing. And that is what led us into surveillance work. Our goal at ACRE, or our sort of like research angle, is always who is profiting. And as we have been digging more into the relationship between Wall Street and policing, we recognize that tech and surveillance is a very profitable industry. And so we're hoping that our research and our work this year can really amplify the campaigns that are happening on the ground, which is how we got to this panel that I'm really excited for. And so a couple of things that we want to, that we hope we can get across in this panel is that surveillance is a form of policing that needs to be abolished and replaced with more community prescribed and democratically controlled forms of public safety. Also, like I just had shared, the tech industry is making billions of dollars off of their ability to create and sell technology to law enforcement. And because of that, one of ACRE's concerns is that they will also the tech industry will likely have a say in like what the post-defund world looks like. We also want to emphasize that police protect capital, and surveillance and criminalization of our communities is really something that unites us under common enemies across gender lines, across race lines, across our different movements. We are really fighting back against like the criminalization of non-white, non-straight, non-wealthy folks. And then lastly, we're hoping to talk about like what we can do to prepare and like organize against the sort of like after defund corporate pushback that we're gonna get. We are expecting expanded surveillance. We can expect private security. And also, you know, we know that tech is not neutral. In fact, it just replicates systems of oppression rather than getting to the root of the issues that our communities face. And so that is our little intro. With that, I'm gonna pass it to the panelists. We can go PG, Jelani, and then Jacinta. And I would just ask that y'all share your name and pronoun, your organization, and then if you could answer what prompted your organization to launch campaigns addressing surveillance, and how has this current movement moment of like COVID and uprisings and state-sanctioned kidnappings, how have all of these things impacted your campaigns around surveillance? And PG, we'll go with you first.
Great. Hey, what up though, y'all? I'm PG. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm from and live in Detroit, Michigan. And I am here representing the Green Light Black Futures Coalition. It's a campaign that we started in the BYP 100, Black Youth Project 100 chapter here a couple of years ago. In order to, well, we started it directly in response to this thing that was kind of new, mostly unknown, public-private partnership called Project Greenlight that's been here in the city of Detroit since about 2017. And as an abolitionist organization, BYP 100, we knew that, and we know that the abolition of policing and incarceration also means the abolition of surveillance, right? And Detroit, this majority Black city with majority Black leadership, you know, our first white mayor in 50 years is our current mayor, Mike Duggan. We've always had like mostly Black city council, mostly Black city representatives, right? And so because of that, there's this narrative about safety or lack of safety in our cities. And like, there's also this like kind of inherent trust of government here, right? Like this inherent trust that they wouldn't do us wrong, right? Like they are our people, they're with us. And so when we started this campaign as directly against the city of Detroit, against the Detroit Police Department, we also have to contend with the narratives that folks believe and know deeply about the conditions here. You know, the narratives of crime and violence and the realities of crime and violence here in our communities, right? Prompt people to trust this type of surveillance. So we started organizing, and one of the first things that we knew and that we wanted to get to the bottom of is this idea of safety, right? What causes us to feel safety, what causes us to feel unsafe, and really rooting that in the ways that the state, the city government fosters distrust within us and among us in order to make us feel less safe with each other, right? And so we knew that as organizers, one of the things we had to do, in addition to directly resisting Project Greenlight, calling for its dismantling and pushing for something else, we also had to make sure that we're building up the trust, building up the compassion, building up the care in our communities at the same time. So this movement moment and this social moment, this, you know, health crisis moment, all of this has deeply impacted our work. I mean, I think like most young Black people at the beginning of all of this, you know, just dealing and reeling in all of the ways that our world has been turned around, you know, and so having to deal with the impact of that as organizers and needing to take the breaks that we needed internally. And then since then, coming back and trying to be like, okay, we know that our folks still need political education. We know that our folks still need support through mutual aid. We know that right now the city is even more likely to encourage surveillance and all that shit because of COVID, because of uprisings, right? In the city of Detroit, we saw them use the Project Greenlight cameras in order to ticket and charge people who were gathering outside of stores or gathering at playgrounds, right? So we're seeing the direct impact of how they will use these things in the age of pandemic, in the age of uprising. Detroit was already dealing with federal troops through Operation Relentless Pursuit and federal resources through that program. And now with Operation Legend, like just doubling down of that, right? So yeah, our campaign is trying to do a lot of things in collaboration and coalition with several organizations in the city, including one of the people's, one of the, I think, biggest thought partners locally around digital justice, Detroit Community Technology Project. So doing a lot of work around Project Greenlight and facial recognition technology over the past couple of years. So that's me.
Thanks, PG. And we'll go with Jelani.
Hey y'all, my name is Jelani. I use they, them pronouns. I'm based in Durham, North Carolina, and I am a campaign manager at Kairos, also a 2018 alumni from the Kairos Fellowship Program. I think, you know, the first question around what prompted our organization to do this is interesting for Kairos because we just started campaigning. So Kairos, the foundation of Kairos is really fighting against white supremacy and white supremacist ideology and like technopositivism. It was really formed by like Black and brown people who were seeing technology and the internet and how they interplayed with our lives and our democracy, and how it was really white driven and driven by habits of white supremacy. And so like we started a fellowship program to place people of color into digital organizing positions. And after being like successful with that, we started to campaign this year. And so I am a campaign manager, and our campaign director, Iram, we're kind of like building this foundation of campaigning from Kairos, but from a lot of knowledge from both, you know, being alumni and Kairos having this history around really analyzing technology and the internet and the way that works, especially for people of color. And so our first campaign, it's called the Tech is Not Neutral campaign. And we saw like this moment, this moment of uprising around Black liberation and Black Lives Matters as a moment to bring in perspective around technology, especially since the response from Silicon Valley in this moment has been really quite performative. We've we've seen Jeff Bezos like tweet Black Lives Matters, and like we know that doesn't actually, that's not real, right? Because of all the things that Amazon does. And technology, like the way it's been used as a weapon against Black and brown people in particular, like is this thing I think that is coming to the forefront, like kind of thanks to this moment that we're in. So that's why we launched the Tech is Not Neutral campaign. We highlighted a couple of different companies, Amazon, Nextdoor, Google. And so with that, we're hoping to really just like continue campaigning under that. And I also wanted to shout out our partners, Movement for Black Lives, BYP 100, Empower Change, 18 Million Rising, and Media Justice that really helped us get the Tech is Not Neutral campaign off the ground. And I think like this movement moment around COVID, around uprisings, it's really a moment that I think that we know has always been here locally, nationally, internationally, and we're at another inflection point. This moment has really affected our campaigning by making it more relevant than ever. You know, we're seeing privacy concerns and digital privacy concerns around like COVID and contact tracing and by like collecting biometric data. We're seeing what PG already explained, like organizers, protesters being surveilled on the streets through police surveillance. And then we're also seeing how disinformation and misinformation is really being used through these platforms and through technology that is enabling the right way to control the narrative, and they're using this tech to do so. And the other kind of part that I'll throw in around Kairos is we're also seeing all these really amazing organizers and social justice organizations having to move to digital right now, which is because we can't, be out on the streets all that much, which is really showing us how like digital security practices aren't something that people across the board are practicing. And it really puts organizers at risk and further being targeted by the state. And because of this, like surveillance and security are at the top for us. And it's super important as we move into election season, post-election, all of those things.
Thank you. Jacinta?
Hey everybody, good morning. My name is Jacqueline Gonzalez. I'm a senior campaign organizer with Mi Gente. I use she, her, ella pronouns. Usually I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona, but today I am calling in from Mexico, getting to spend some time with parents. So for us as Mi Gente, we're a national membership organization of Latina and Chicana people that are organizing for a variety of different reasons. And a lot of us have a lot of, roots organizing both against policing, but also against deportations and immigration and customs enforcement. And so the way that we kind of got to surveillance was really kind of noticing on the ground how ICE enforcement was changing. And it was changing from a place where
You broke up for a second.
I broke up, sorry.
Oh, there we go.
Am I back? Okay,
yep.
Sorry. That's part of the traveling to Mexico thing makes the wireless not as reliable, so I apologize. But the way that Mi Gente kind of got to immigration and to surveillance was because we were noticing that immigration and customs enforcement's practices around enforcement were really changing. And we started to notice that in places where, for example, especially in places that were sanctuary cities, ICE was increasing the number of raids they were doing in people's homes, going door to door, or increasing the level of workplace raids that were happening. And so people were asking us questions like, how did they get my address? How do they know what car I drive? How do they know who my coworkers are? How do they know who my cousin is? And that really made us have to do a lot of research to understand what the surveillance network that these agencies had at their disposal. And for us, like this is really changing and increasing even more under COVID, because we're seeing COVID and the uprising being used as an excuse to increase more surveillance, to have more sources of data that's actually leading to more of the same problems. So for us, it's really just kind of the next chapter in policing and immigration enforcement. And so we're both having to dismantle the things they've been building for centuries, and also having to respond to what we know are going to be future attacks as they're continuing to try to, limit people's movement, limit people's ability to live lives with dignity, and continuing to police Black and brown bodies.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all. That just got me way more excited now to get into the panel. So we have about 20 minutes for our panel, one question each, and then a closeout question. And we should have about 5 or 10 minutes at the end of this to take Q&A from attendees. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A box rather than the chat. Okay. So Jacinta, our first question is for you, and it's about the Who's Behind ICE report. So in this report that Mi Gente identified the companies that create and contract the tech used by ICE. What has corporate campaigning looked like for y'all after this report, and how has it moved your campaign towards the broader goals of abolishing ICE?
Thanks, that's a really important question. I think as an organization, we've been advocating for the abolishment of ICE and deportations for, a very long time. But what we saw when the Trump administration came into power is that all of a sudden you actually had an administration that was not willing to negotiate, that actually saw cruelty as the point of immigration enforcement, and was not going to move in any way, shape, or form, while at the same time they were building up much more infrastructure for these same agencies. So we decided to do this research that led to the Who's Behind ICE report that in a lot of ways was like an unveiling of all of the corporations that are really building up ICE's machinery. And we uncovered some really crazy things, right? So for example, like how is ICE getting all of this data? They rely on data brokers. And some of their main data brokers are companies like Thomson Reuters or RELX or LexisNexis. These are companies that most lawyers would think are just like research tools, but turns out they're actually selling all of our information, including utilities, including information from the Office of Motor Vehicles, directly to the hands of ICE. We also uncovered that the company that's really building up the backbone infrastructure for the data analytics to be able to create files on people to expand surveillance is this company called Palantir, that has just announced recently that they're going to be going public. And we also realized that, behind all of this kind of really deeply it hadn't been reported before, is that Amazon Cloud Services was actually providing the cloud services for all of these contracts. And so for us, it was really important to both be able to explain this to people and kind of educate our communities on what's happening so that they also have a way of protecting themselves, which is why we've created popular education materials, comic books, workshop guides that folks can access on our website, notechforice.com. But we also knew that that meant that there was actually a need to campaign against these companies and actually organize and mobilize power. So we knew a lot of that was just exposing people in the media. A lot of that is doing mobilizations and actions. So we've had, huge protests both in California and in New York at their offices. We know that folks in New York that were fighting against the Amazon headquarters used a lot of these arguments really intensely in pushing back and winning and being able to get that win for their community there. But for us, it also has meant that we can expand and actually organize in other spaces that we hadn't before, right? Through this campaign, we've begun to organize students that are actually being able to create a lot of power by organizing on their campus against recruitment from a lot of these companies, right? These companies are relying on new young people to come in and work for them. And so we've really had to shift the conversation of no, getting a new job at Amazon or getting a job at Palantir, it's not actually something that's good, that it should actually have moral weight. And people are starting to kind of change their consciousness on campuses around that. We've also realized that it's an opportunity to start to work also with investors for them to understand the risks of actually investing in these types of companies and pushing back on companies like BlackRock, right? That are companies that are both investing in climate disaster, and are also investing in policing and militarization of the border in a lot of ways. So it's become a place where we can actually also build cross-movement, cross-sectoral movement, where people are starting to understand the bigger analysis of how capitalism is really is fueling so many of these things, and how these companies are profiting so much off of these structures. Because we have to understand that the politics and the economics are so closely linked, right? It's like, no matter who we have in the White House, we're gonna be fighting against these tech companies and these data companies. But at the same time, these tech and data companies, their influence is shaping the same policies that are holding people down, because they wanna keep them in place because they know it's gonna benefit their bottom line. And so for us, it's been really important to both be able to like hold on to the demand of, we need to abolish ICE, we need to fight against deportations, and we also have to expose the corporate partners that are actually building up the infrastructure that are making this possible to begin with, and lining their pockets in that process. So, you know, if folks are interested in getting more involved in the campaign, for us, this really is about organizing. If it's about organizing against, you know, organizing something in your local city to have better policies around this, to protect people's data, or to try to, you know, defund the police and defund the types of contracts that they have that lead to surveillance, there's a ton of resources that we have for that. If you're a student that wants to get organized, there's, you know, resources for that. So for us, it's really important, yeah, to continue to mobilize and get people to be involved in the fight, because really this is kind of just a sneak peek of what the type of infrastructure that tech and data companies are building for police, whether it's at a local level or the federal agencies, you know, that are, you know, going into cities across the country.
Thank you. And I want to highlight, I appreciate you talking about like the profit and the bottom line piece. And it, I think, leads nicely into the question I have for PG, because I remember doing some research into Detroit's Project Greenlight, and going to see that there's like a list, this long list of vendors for cameras. And like, I think we were expecting just like, this is an example of who you might partner with, but Detroit has like this really long approved vendor list. And knowing that there are like over 500 cameras, sorry, my co-facilitator is telling me that I need to be quiet. But yeah, knowing that there are over 500 cameras in Detroit, what does this mean for everyone in the US?
Yeah, so I made a note when Jacinta was saying that, because I was like, yeah, corporations are at the root of what's happening here too, right? Like exactly what you said about the vendor list. When you enroll in Project Greenlight, there are folks that you're required to go through for your internet, to buy the actual cameras that go up, right? The signage, you have to get it printed at certain people, like with certain people, right? Like there's so many specifics about who you're allowed to partner with. And you know, behind those companies are people that we know are pulling the strings in our city in different ways, right? Folks like Dan Gilbert, corporate billionaires who are displacing folks and causing major harm and violence in our city and around the country. So yeah, definitely related, I think. And just what does it mean? I think one of the most insidious parts about this program is the way that it's this public-private partnership, right? Like the way that it's something that the city and the police department are doing, but it's also like every business who decides to become a Project Greenlight business is a partner, right? And they have to pay. I cannot remember now the amount you have to pay for the enrollment fee, and then like there's like a monthly fee as well. But you know, folks are literally buying into this program, which in turn the city and the police department are able to say that there's buy-in, right? Like there's community buy-in here. People want this. Folks are actively like choosing to do it. I know that between the time that they first really announced what they were doing, which wasn't for some time after they started doing it, but when they first announced that they were doing it, they had a few businesses, like, I can't remember them. I used to know these numbers, and now I don't talk about the specifics of this as much anymore, so I can't remember, but like not very many businesses, right? Like you could see it on one page of a list. These are all the Project Greenlight businesses. Now, like Alex is saying, there's over 500 cameras, there's hundreds of businesses, and not even just businesses, but schools and public housing projects and funeral homes and clinics and churches who are also buying into this program. Because on one hand, the Detroit Police Department is saying, if you pay us, we'll come faster. If you pay us this money for this program, you'll be first on our list and we'll come right to you. And so that is a benefit in a city where the truth and the reality of the last several decades in the city is if you call the police, they won't come. They won't come at all. They won't come for hours. They might not come for days. So the promise of, oh, maybe they'll respond when we have a problem, is something that folks are excited about and willing to buy into. And I just think that's important to name because they're able to use these, they get these statistics out of thin air, it feels like, and out of like 6 months of proof, they're like, this is the truth for everything now. And then other cities are able to use it as a model. Our police chief is on Fox News regularly now, it seems like, talking about the ways that they have this city under control and how they have this city, the citizens of this city would never do things like this, what's happening in Portland and other places. And that narrative being spread so widely makes Detroit a place that people are watching. I mean, Detroit has always been a place people will watch. Detroit has always been a place that people model after. And now, even more so, they're doing this in order to figure out how they can get this type of program in their cities. So we're seeing those conversations happening with the police chief and the mayor in other cities. And yeah, just increased criminalization of normal activity. Like I said about the PGL cameras being used to watch and ticket people who are gathering at parks and outside of gas stations and things like that, it's just really insidious. And I think that they're able to use that super low key way of being everywhere and also using this really coerced enrollment from all these businesses as a way of proving that it's something that works, as a way of showing to other places that they should also use a similar type of technology. And so, yeah, we've been really trying to fight against that here.
Thank you. And then last question, Jelani, is for you. And I think, when we talked about this before, there's definitely a link between this public-private partnership that we see happening with the Detroit cameras and then Amazon Ring that is very much a version of private security. And so how does that, what are the links between these different versions of private security and state-sanctioned surveillance at any level, really?
Yeah, totally. Amazon Ring is like a really evil and interesting kind of setup. So Amazon Ring is, for folks who may not know, they are like this home security system that you can buy, and it essentially is a doorbell with a camera on it. I just bought a house and we were walking in Lowe's the other day, and they have them at the Lowe's hardware store, just like Ring cameras, you can get them there. And that is an Amazon company. Amazon bought the Ring as a company. Amazon Ring has partnerships with police departments that they actually seek out. And so they're selling these Ring contracts to police departments. Police departments then will say to community members, hey, y'all should get these Ring cameras. It's really good. And you can give us the footage from your cameras so we can make sure that you're safe. There's around 1,300 partnerships across the United States with local police departments, and they're rapidly increasing. There's many different types of there's a map that they have. There's a map that I know Fight for the Future has been really holding down this work on a specific strategy for a long time, and have been mapping out this kind of growing number of police partnerships with Amazon Ring. There's and I think it's interesting because there's the corporate to police to community flow that's happening here. And it's really based on the fear of poor people and Black and brown people who are just kind of walking by your house. there's this false promise of safety from Amazon when they're like pushing this technology, and it really is like turning communities and neighbors into vigilantes and is encouraging neighbors to surveil each other. So instead of me going to my neighbor next door and saying, hey, I saw something weird, or like, are you okay? Like, you know, actually I'm building community with the folks here. People are using these cameras to say like, oh, a suspicious like Black person walked by, or, you know, I picked up this footage of a delivery person like actually delivering mail to my house, and I just thought they were suspicious because they were brown. And it's really like this, and this pipeline makes it so that, you know, habits of white supremacy in the community enabled by this technology that the police have access to, that Amazon is selling, it really like builds this national and hyper local surveillance network. The other thing is that I've been hearing some stories and researching and talking to communities all over the country that there's communities of color who are using Ring to protect themselves from agencies like ICE. And that is a really complicated issue. I think it relates to state sanctioned violence because there's actors who are coming into neighborhoods like police, ICE, CBP, that have access to this network of home cameras, and Ring has really created that. And there's this like false sense of safety. And so we have people who are both like, you know, built is both like fearing Black and brown people in their neighborhood, fearing their neighbors generally. But we also have people like us on the panel who look like us on the panel who are using this technology to stay safe. And so this is kind of like a huge like jumble of things that we're working with. And it really is like, how do we fight against capitalism and authoritarianism on the like police Amazon Ring side, and then how on the community level do we really tackle like this idea that you aren't safe without this technology, these ideas around racism, xenophobia, homophobia, misogyny, like these deep-seated like ideas in some communities. And so like with Ring campaigns that a lot of folks have been running, especially in like the Athena Coalition, and I shouted out like Fight for the Future, and Ayala Fight for the Future has really been holding that down. Like with these campaigns, it's really like we're trying to get at all sides here around Amazon Ring.
Thank you. So I just have one last question for the three of y'all. I think we can choose how we answer it. If you want to go one at a time, if y'all want to build off of each other. But it ties into Jelani, what you were just saying about how like around the doorbells, right? Like it's very jumbled, and that there are people using it to protect themselves, and there are also people using it to criminalize their neighbors. And so this last question is, what is it going to take for the general public to understand the harmful reality of a growing surveillance state, and like what would massive pushback actually look like? And I'll just open it to whoever wants to start.
I can jump in. I mean, I think one of the things that we have been hoping that people start to understand is just how all of these systems are really linked. And once the technology is out there, we have actually not as much control over how it's being used. So we always actually have to be asking questions. And part of the reason I say that is, well, we've discovered a lot about the technology that, for example, ICE uses. It wasn't originally intended for ICE. A lot of these technologies were, for example, intended for war zones, right? A lot of the drones, a lot of the mobile biometric devices, a lot of the type of surveillance was actually created, you know, in a post 9/11 world for a war in the Middle East, brought back to a militarized border. And then police departments and ICE agencies have basically been experimenting with it on who they consider to be the most disposable communities, and then it becomes widespread. Right. And so that's the process that we're really witnessing right now. Right. That's the process that, for example, we're witnessing when we see federal DHS agents in cities, retaliated against officers. If this is how Border Patrol is treating white moms in, Portland, imagine how they're treating people trying to cross the border. Right. Like, it is actually a continued expansion of the same system. And so I just actually hope that folks start to really hear the stories that communities that have been on the front lines of this battle with police for so long are telling us, because it is a foreshadowing of what's to come. I talked about Palantir as a company that is creating, data analytics for ICE. They are also creating the Protect platform for Health and Human Services to monitor COVID. So if that doesn't scare the bejesus out of you, I don't know what will, right? Because what we're starting to see is these corporations are starting to build more power, more information, more money, more access than we can even imagine. And it's all behind closed doors. And so we actually have to, we're in a fight, not just about what the role of technology is, but actually what is the role of companies in government, and what is the role of companies in policing when we're trying to actually have conversations about what public safety means and what a life with dignity means in grassroots communities that are hurting on so many levels right now. So what is it going to take? I think we're at this really, really interesting point where all of a sudden folks, if you ask people in the 90s, people are like, oh my God, the internet's amazing, right? Like, at least we're at a place now where we're actually starting to get to the crux of the problem and starting to have conversations. You're starting to have tech workers internally start to organize. You have students starting to change the way they're approaching, where they want to work. You have frontline communities that are pushing back, and you have people that are, turning to uprisings to actually have a meaningful voice in local government. Like, it is a moment where you can start to see a new conversation happen, but we have to be able to push like hell. And we have to actually remind ourselves that the thing that is going to save us is going to be our human relationships with one another. Like, part of the other thing that tech and surveillance and policing try to do is they try to marginalize, they try to other, they try to make sure that we just think of ourselves as numbers or sort of, pieces of this other puzzle. But what actually gets us to go to the streets and actually say, let's imagine a different way of doing things. Let's kind of get into, gnarly debates about what it's going to look like. That's always going to be about human contact. That's always going to be about personal relationships. That's always going to be about true revolutionary organizing. That's kind of like being in the streets with one another. And I think that these moments are the moments where we can actually say, like, oh, that has a role, it's working, right? We're starting to see it work in a lot of places. Let's try to figure out how we take those openings and make them bigger. And that's where we have to kind of flow and have to continue to build. And we have to know that we're going to have to use all tactics. This election is crucial. We know that we actually, we have to get Trump out of the White House. And we also know that we're going to have to be fighting against these companies and fighting for local government and also creating alternatives outside of what the state is offering us, because our people have so many ideas and so much power to actually be able to build those. So I think it's like, there's no magic wand, there's no silver bullet, but there is a process that we know, which is organizing, that has let us transform institutions in the past and which can continue to let us build up a strong movement to fight back against surveillance, and also the control that these big tech and data companies are having over our democracy, our lives, our policing systems, and our economy.
Yeah. I think the main thing I was also going to say was about it really needing to take our relationships, needing us to understand like what it means to look out for each other, and to have a new idea of safety. And so, we're doing this large push for this community safety survey here, like really trying to interview folks, both through street outreach and digital outreach and phone banking and things like that, to ask like, what does safety really mean? Like, when do you feel safe? When do you feel unsafe? What do you wish you had more of in your community to foster that sense of safety? What do you wish you knew? And knowing that is part of the beginning of the shifting of this conversation, right? To be able to say, because the thing that folks will say in pushing back against our organizing is, well, what else is there? You know what I mean? Like, what else are you going to do? You're just going to let folks run wild, you know, with no accountability. And it's like, no, actually, we can think about what do we need to create so that, one, folks aren't running wild in the first place, right? Making sure folks can eat, making sure folks got a place to live, making sure that folks have things to do, like, you know, recreation centers. We were just talking about how there's a recreation center, and most recreation centers here, like, aren't actually open like after 5 p.m. or on the weekends. And it's just like, what is the point? You know, so just things like that that actually can give folks things to do that keep us safer, right? How do we invest? Like, we know that they're spending $22 million ish, maybe more than that, $22 million that we know that we can track on Project Greenlight. And what could that money be spent on instead, right? And so I know also one thing in Detroit that we're continuing to do in our conversations about Project Greenlight is like, the general public needs to understand that it's not working. It doesn't work, right? Like, it doesn't actually do what they say it's going to do. We have multiple cases now that are becoming more and more public about being wrongfully arrested and convicted because of facial recognition technology that misrepresented, because this technology is not neutral, right? Like, this technology is racist. This technology cannot actually recognize the difference between Black features and other features and other faces, right? Like, it's like, so one of the main things is like, it just doesn't work, y'all. It doesn't work. So if we could just even start there, even without even getting into all the rest of the BS behind this, right? All of the rest of the ways that they're fostering distrust and fostering continued wealth disparity and encouraging corporate privatization of public services and public property. It's just not working. Like, it just doesn't work. You know what I mean? So I think that's one of the ways that we're trying to start the conversation. And then I think massive pushback looks like businesses opting out, right? Businesses publicly saying, I'm not going to enroll in this program anymore. I've decided that I actually want to care for my community. I actually want to keep my community safe. And so I'm going to go about this a different way. I think that it looks like folks deciding that we are not going to let the Board of Police Commissioners here, some of whom are former police officers, are supposed to be a civilian oversight board, decide what the rules and regulations are about this technology anymore. Like, that they need to have a different form of accountability, that the way that they're currently operating isn't sufficient. It isn't fair to the people of Detroit, and it's doing everybody dirty. And so, yeah, just continuing to push back again. And just like Jacinta said, like, in the political and electoral arena, pushing back in our daily lives and our social relationships, and also like in what we can do, right? If I'm a business owner, I can actually make a public statement about this and decide to do something differently that can change the narrative, right? So yeah, I think that it's possible, but we do have to understand the harmfulness of it, the ways that it kind of seeps into everything without us fully understanding it, right? Like, and how ultimately we can all be deeply impacted by it, regardless of whether or not we are a good person or not.
Yeah, I plus one, like what everyone else has said. And PG, I was just reading that I think it was Detroit police chief was like, oh yeah, our facial recognition doesn't work like 96% of the time. And I'm like, so why are you, okay.
Literally, like what?
Like what? I was big mad. But yeah, I think like in my dreams, everyone's ripping off their Ring cameras and they're shipping them back to Amazon. Like, that's my dream out of all, out of like at least the Ring campaign. But I really do think it does start at like community safety and like thinking like safety is not surveillance. Like, that is not what that equals. How do we actually tackle what is under the need for people to have something like a Ring camera, to be on next door, like also surveilling people in their neighborhoods? What is under like local businesses wanting to have facial recognition technology, or even businesses like Rite Aid just was revealed that they've been using this facial recognition technology for years. What is under that? How do we dismantle that? And I think it has to do with relationships on a community level. And then I think as organizers, as organizations, as a movement, it's really going to need to be a coordinated effort around all of these things. We, each kind of have like our little lane. And so working in those lanes and working in a coordinated movement to like push forward. So if I see like PG working in Detroit, like I'm like, okay, cool. Like I can uplift your stuff and I can like get my people to work with your people that you may not know. How do we work like across um, cultural lines where like, okay, maybe we're doing a totally like Black autonomous space over here, but then there's like our Latinx like brothers and sisters who are working on something that's like related to immigration, and like how do we work through that together, right? Um, and I think that this work around surveillance is ever changing. Like probably something I'll read today is something that totally new and I didn't know yesterday. And so like I think it's going to take like keeping up with what's changing, and then also kind of translating that into words that are not so techy or not so like deep in the in these words that like maybe like tech bros use, and kind of like here's how this is actually affecting real people in our communities right now. So yeah, those are some of the things I think it's going to take.
And I'll just add one thing because I just saw one of the questions from that folks are asking about if Trump would have been able to build his deportation force without this, and were these corporations complicit before he was elected. Part of the pushback is going to be like, we have to hold all politicians accountable on this, because Republicans and Democrats are equally horrible on these issues. You know, when Trump is saying we need to build a brick and mortar border wall, Democrats are like literally like falling over each other trying to be like, no, 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 what we need is a surveillance border wall, right? Like they're actually the ones that are promoting that type of approach to the same types of issues. And so I also think like force of all of this is going to be like, we just have to hold everyone accountable to those principles, to those values, to those processes, because it's not about one party versus the other. It's actually about what communities need and what communities are demanding.
And I know we have to close out, but I did just drop in the chat a couple of links. One of them to Green Chairs Not Green Lights, which is this like counter campaign that some folks locally have started at the Bog Center, Feed 'em Freedom Growers, and Detroit Community Technology Project, to get folks back on their front porches and encourage like, you know, people saying like, I'm gonna look out for my neighborhood. I don't need these cameras too. And then the other thing I linked was Riverwise Magazine is a local community magazine. And they did a special edition on surveillance and Project Greenlight. And so there's a digital copy of that linked in the chat as well.
I can go ahead and answer the one question in here too about Ring. Yes, like localities and states can ban the usage of Ring. We've been finding that it really depends on where you're at, what that looks like. Some contracts are different some contracts are like MOU, some contracts are different. So it really depends. And I think it just is about like the type of contract that your locality has. I think too, it's about budget. And so like, how can you reform the budget so that they don't have money to like have this like Ring relationship? And that's like real deep in the defund police work that a lot of like Black organizers are leading right now. But I'm happy to chat more around like how you can get information around and more research around where you're at and Ring contracts.
Thanks, y'all. So, there's a lot of background noise, but that wraps our panel. I dropped links in the chat to the different campaigns that we've talked about today, different ways that you can find folks on social for these campaigns. So make sure to grab those things before you actually like leave the Zoom room. And I just want to give a special thank you to our panelists. Thanks y'all so much. This was really dope. I'm very appreciative. And yeah, defund the police, abolish Wall Street, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, y'all. Much love.